What's up, guys? Book review time. Today we're doing Spangle by Gary Jennings. Still on this Gary Jennings kick. I just love him as an author. Um, this book was awesome, and it was such a fun adventure to go on. And just to give you the premise of the story real quick, it's about a Civil War veteran who was a cavalry commander for the Confederacy. The book starts basically as the South is turning in their weapons. They just lost the war. And so he's looking for new employment. And he happens upon a circus. And it's like a really rickety ragtag circus, nothing special. Like the tent has holes in it. They use the same props for different acts because they can't afford new ones. They have to fish in the river sometimes because they can't afford food. It's it's a really rundown circus. And so he joins up and you watch it go from this ragtag circus, a mud show as they call it, and it goes over to Europe eventually and becomes the most grand circus in all of Europe. And they end up they go from sleeping on the side of the road to sleeping in these five-star hotels and performing for emperors. And it's just such a wonderful story from rags to riches. And you really go along with this whole circus troupe. So like in the beginning, there's a core. There's a core that stays with the circus, obviously. But in the beginning, a lot of those characters die off or leave the circus for whatever reason. And then new acts come in to replace them. And in general, the circus keeps growing as it goes along. I mean, it must become like 6 times the size of it as when it started. And it's just an awesome journey to see them go from that. And to see all the little inner workings of the circus too. Like, you can tell Jennings spent a lot of time around circuses to write this book because there's a lot of little nuances and little circus slang that he puts into the book. And he just describes even like the setting up of the big tent. When he first describes that, it's like a whole action-packed sequence of everybody doing their job, and like someone pulls a pulley here and someone hammers in this here, and you can almost like see it in front of your eyes. He describes it so well. Even that was like interesting. And he puts a lot of the circus slang into the book, like the term rube, which is like, like the ordinary people outside the circus. They call them rubes. And just like the little things that he puts in the book really gives you the feel like you're in this underground society, this circus world. And he does that with all the countries that you visit too. So when you're in America, you feel like you're in America. You feel like you're in the racist South. And then when you go over to Europe, each country really feels like you're there. So when you're in Italy, it has a whole different feel than the way things are in Russia. And he puts like these cultural mannerisms into the book. So like, for example, the Russians will use the word tak. Instead of saying they'll say tak. And so as these Russian characters are talking, they're all saying tak. And it's just like these little things that really suck you into the culture that he's describing. And he'll use like native words. So like when a Frenchman is talking, he's talking in English, but he'll throw in French words while he's talking, which is what people that are bilingual do. It's just like those little things that really just add to the immersion of the entire book. And so I love that aspect of it. And it's why I love Gary Jennings as an author, his ability to really put you in the setting he's describing. Another thing I loved about this book, it's a classic Jennings staple, is just his research and his, not historical accuracy, but his ability to weave in historical figures and events into the story. And so in this book, they mess up like Stonewall Jackson's cannonball grave. Like there was actually a grave for Stonewall Jackson that was made of a pile of cannonballs. And in the story, they like mess with it. And while they're overseas, they run into different emperors, like the Tsar Alexander of Russia, who was a real person, and Louis Napoleon of France, who was a real person. And I love how he intermixes these historical figures and events into the story. And so you get like a little bit of a history lesson to go along with it. And I'm a huge history nerd. And so for him to really like educate me about the Franco-Prussian War and the Austro-Prussian War, I didn't get a lot of detail about it, but I didn't know these wars existed before I read this book. I love that I just get even a little bit of a history lesson while I'm reading this fantastic story. To me, it just adds to the immersion. I love the fact that it's based. It really feels like a real circus from the 1800s, and especially the way he's able to incorporate these historical figures into the narrative. It really makes it feel like that. Um, Another thing I love about this book, it's both a pro and a con. Its length, it's really long, and there are some points where he goes overboard with the historical detail, and it can kind of be dry reading. I didn't mind it too much, but some people might not like it. Um, but the length of this book, it can be a lot to get through, and this is a commitment. But it allows the characters to be so fleshed out, and it's so long that like things that happen in the beginning of the book, by the time you get to the end, they really feel like years ago. And like Gary has a really good way of like incorporating those memories back into the book. You're like, oh, I remember that. It's like, oh, I haven't seen that person in so long. Like, I wonder how they're doing. It's a fictional book, character in a book, but I'm like thinking about him now like that. It just, to me, like the length of the book also added to the immersion because it's the book takes place over 6 years, and you really see all the development over the 6 years. Like, there's a lot of detail in this book, and so you really, I don't want to go too into any detail or give away any surprises, but this book, there's a lot of drama, there's a lot of things that happen in this book. So it's just, to me, like you're like living the life with them, and I just love that part of it. And so if I had to give a rating to this book, I'd probably give it like an 8 out of 10. It wouldn't be a top 5 book, and it's nothing that you're gonna write home about as the greatest book you've ever read, but it's an adventure. And Gary Jennings' ability to take you on this ride with this circus with him, it's just indescribable. For me, I loved it. And by the end of this book, I wished it was longer. It's 870 pages. I wish there was another 800, because by the end, like, you're so invested in these characters, and the adventures seem never ending. And I loved how, even towards the end of this book, it didn't feel like the book was ending. And even the ending was just so perfect. I'm not going to tell you guys, but it was just so perfect. I was so pleased with the way it ended because it had to end that way. Um, I'm hyped about this book. I don't want to overhype it. It's not anything that you're going to put in your top 5, like I said. But if you want an adventure that you can take for a while and to be immersed into a world like this underground circus world, it was just perfect for me. And I remember even when I was reading this book, one of my buddies invited me to like an acro gym, like an acrobatics gym, and they're doing like circus stuff in there, and they're all juggling and practicing these different, moves and maneuvers. And I'm like, wow, like I remember leaving that place while I was reading this book, and they were like just kind of like coming together. Like the amount of effort it takes to entertain people and to really put on a show like that is, it's way more than you think, and you really get the sense of that from this book. So I hope I encouraged you to check it out. Definitely drop me a like, follow me or whatever. I'm going to keep doing these book reviews, so I hope to see you guys back here soon. Thanks, guys.